Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, um, we're going to get into some really fascinating stuff. We're talking about North American red squirrels.
Oh, yeah.
You know those cute little guys you see running up trees?
Hmm.
We're going to be diving into the world of their territories
Yes, it's
and
gonna be fun.
why they're so important,
It is.
especially in a place like the Yukon.
Exactly. We're going to be looking at a paper from 2020 in the Journal of Animal Ecology. And what's so cool about this study is that it's based on 27 years of data from the Kluane Red Squirrel Project in Yukon, Canada.
27 years.
27 years. Yeah.
That's incredible.
It's amazing. They've been studying these squirrels for
Longer than some of our listeners have been alive, probably.
longer than we've been. A lot of people have been alive.
I know, that's what I was thinking. I was like, wow. So tell me, what did they learn about these red squirrels and their territories? Like, why are they so important?
Well, think of it this way. Like, a territory is basically a squirrel's survival kit, especially in the Yukon. So you've got predators, right? You've got lynx, you've got weasels, and then you've got these crazy cold Yukon winters.
Yeah, those are brutal.
Yeah, and they're long. So having a territory, this little patch that's theirs, with enough food and a good place to call home,
Right, like shelter.
it really makes all the difference. And this study actually focuses specifically on how important it is for young squirrels
Okay.
to get a territory before winter hits.
Oh, so this is like their first winter
Their first winter.
out on their own.
Exactly. And whether or not they can secure one of these patches of land with resources can be the difference between life and death.
Oh, wow. Yeah, because if you don't have a territory, I mean, we're talking predators like lynx and weasels, and those Yukon winters are no joke. I mean, how are you going to find enough food?
Right, and where are you going to stay warm? Exactly.
So having that territory with, like you said, their little stash of food sounds super crucial, especially for these youngsters.
It is. But here's the thing that's so interesting. The study actually found that, and this was kind of a surprise,
Okay.
they found that squirrels who don't get a territory actually sometimes do better in colder winters.
Wait a minute. Hold on. I thought you were saying having a territory is like life or death for these little guys.
Right.
But now you're telling me that not having one could actually be an advantage,
Yeah.
especially during a harsh winter. I'm a
Oh.
little confused.
Yeah, it's a paradox, right?
Yeah.
And it seems counterintuitive, but that's what the research is showing, is that in colder winters,
Okay.
they might actually have a higher survival rate if they don't have a territory.
So we're already seeing that, it's not always black and white, right? Like
Yeah.
what we think is going to be the key to survival,
Totally.
maybe sometimes it's about being a little more flexible,
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
little more adaptable.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of other factors at play too. But before we get into all of that, I think it's really important to understand, like, what exactly are we talking about when we say squirrel territory?
Okay, yeah. Paint me a picture. What does it look like? What's so special about it?
So these red squirrels
Mhm.
are really territorial,
Okay.
and they defend a certain area, right?
Okay.
And in that area, they have the central cache where they store their food, which is mostly white spruce cones.
Oh, interesting.
That's their main food source.
Like they've got pantry
It's like their pantry,
filled
their
with.
favorite snacks.
Yeah, okay. So finding that right spot with a well-stocked pantry, that's prime real estate in the squirrel world.
It is, absolutely. And here's why timing is so critical.
Yeah.
Because the white spruce cones,
Those are their favorite.
their favorite,
Okay.
they ripen in early August.
Okay.
So if you're a young squirrel
Mm-hmm.
and you're able to get a territory before the cones ripen,
So you're there early.
you're there early and you can collect them and stash them in your midden,
Okay.
then you're set for the winter. Right. But if you miss out, if you don't get a territory in time,
Mm-hmm.
then you have to make do with whatever's left over.
Oh, so like the scraps.
The scraps, yeah.
Like,
The leftovers from the previous owner.
that doesn't sound very good.
It's not ideal.
No.
And you don't get to build up your own big stash.
Right. So it's like a race against time,
Exact.
and only the early birds get the best food.
Absolutely. It's all about timing.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings us to the central question that this research is trying to answer, which is,
Okay, lay it on me.
what are the biggest threats to these young squirrels during the winter?
Okay.
And how does having a territory or not having a territory play into all of that?
Right, because we've talked about food, but you mentioned those predators earlier.
Exactly.
How much of a danger are those lynx and weasels, especially for little squirrel on their first winter?
Yeah. So there was actually some previous research
Okay.
that suggested that while predators are definitely around, they don't have a huge impact on, like, the overall red squirrel population
Okay.
in the boreal forest.
So in general, they're doing okay.
In general, yeah. But what this study did is it zoomed in on this specific group,
Oh, interesting.
the young squirrels in their first winter,
Okay.
especially the ones without territories.
Right, the vulnerable ones.
Exactly.
Okay.
And for them, the predator threat was a much bigger deal.
Okay. So it's not just predators in general, but it's like this specific vulnerability
Yeah,
of these first-year squirrels.
totally. Because they're smaller, they're less experienced,
Right.
and they might not have, a good food supply.
They're kind of out there on their own.
They're on their own.
Yeah.
So yeah, this study actually found that for those squirrels who didn't have territories, the number of lynx around had a really big impact on whether they survived or not.
Really? So more lynx equals bad news for a young squirrel without a territory.
Basically, yeah. Because more lynx,
Or hungry mouths.
yeah, more mouths to feed,
Yeah.
and less chance of survival. And they also found that weasels had a negative effect on those vulnerable youngsters, too.
So both the lynx and the weasels are impacting these young squirrels.
They are, but the impact of weasels wasn't quite as strong as the lynx.
That's interesting. Why might that be? I mean, don't they both kind of pose a similar threat?
Well, they think it might have to do with their hunting styles.
Okay.
So, red squirrels often build these really cozy nests, sometimes with underground tunnels.
Yeah, like little squirrel bunkers.
Exactly, squirrel bunkers. Now, a lynx is big.
Right.
It's not going to fit in one of those.
They're going to squeeze into those tunnels.
No way. But a weasel?
They can get into anything.
Oh, yeah. They can squeeze into the tiniest spaces. So even if a squirrel has a territory, it might not be enough to protect them from a weasel.
Ah, so it's like having a good security system,
Yeah,
but some predators can still break in.
exactly. So yeah, you've got lynx and weasels both having an effect, but in different ways.
Wow. Okay, so we've got predators, we've got the challenge of finding enough food. But didn't you also say there was something unexpected about those cold winters?
Yes, I
Huh.
did. So going into this, it
Okay.
assumed that colder winters would equal lower survival rates for all the young squirrels, especially the ones without territories.
Right. That makes sense. Like if you don't have a warm nest, a good food stash, those winters must be brutal.
Right, it's got to be tough. But what they found was that
Yeah.
the opposite.
What?
I know. So for squirrels without territories, their survival rates were actually higher in colder winters.
Now, wait a minute. I thought you were saying earlier that a territory was essential.
Yeah.
How could a harsh winter be beneficial for a squirrel without a territory? That doesn't make any sense.
I know it's super counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
I know it's a real head scratcher, like it really throws you for a loop. But the researchers have a couple of theories about why this might be happening.
Okay, I'm listening. What do they think is going on?
Well, one possibility is that in those super cold winters, the squirrels without territories, they're more likely to huddle together for warmth.
Oh, so like big squirrel, cuddle, puddle,
Yeah, exactly.
sharing body heat to survive. That's adorable.
It is kind of cute. And we already know from other research that nest sharing happens sometimes,
Okay.
especially among squirrels that are related.
Okay.
So it seems like the harsher the winter gets,
Yeah.
the more appealing it is to snuggle up for warmth.
So it's like misery loves company, even in the squirrel world.
Exactly. But there's another possibility, too, that they think might be contributing to this.
Okay.
So imagine it's a really, really harsh winter.
Yeah.
It's tough on everyone, right?
Right.
Even those squirrels that have managed to secure a territory.
Yeah, I mean, some of them don't make it through, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Some of them don't make it. And that means
Yeah.
that some territories might open up
Oh, interesting.
because those squirrels, unfortunately, didn't survive.
So like winter vacancies.
Exactly. And so suddenly there's a chance for a squirrel that didn't have a territory,
It's out in the fall.
who missed out, yeah, to suddenly move in and take over.
They get an upgrade.
They get an upgrade, and they get that existing food stash that the previous squirrel had worked so hard to build.
Oh, wow. So it's like a second chance for those who didn't win the territory lottery the first time around.
Exactly. And it just goes to show that even these really harsh events, like a super cold winter, they can actually create opportunities for those squirrels who are able to be adaptable and resourceful.
Yeah, it's really making me rethink what it means to be successful in the wild.
Totally.
You know, it's not always about being the biggest or the strongest.
Yeah.
It's about being flexible and rolling with the punches.
Absolutely. Being able to adjust to whatever comes your way.
That seems like a key takeaway here.
It is. And,
Yeah.
the cold winter paradox is just one part of this puzzle.
Right, because you mentioned there are all these other factors, like when they're born, how fast they grow,
Hmm.
and even how many other animals are in the forest.
Yeah, all of that comes into play.
Okay, so let's dig into that. Like, did those other things turn out to be important too?
They did. So first, let's talk about the abundance of white spruce cones.
Okay, their favorite food.
Their favorite food. We talked about how important those are.
Yeah, the more the merrier, I'm guessing.
Exactly, and that's what they found. In years where there were a ton of cones,
Mm-hmm.
the juvenile survival rates were much higher.
Okay, so a good food year equals good news for the squirrel population.
Pretty much. But here's where it gets interesting,
Right.
because they also looked at the abundance of adult squirrels. And you
Huh.
would think, right, more adult squirrels,
Yeah.
more competition.
Right, less food for the little guys.
Exactly. But that's not what they found.
Really?
Yeah, they found the opposite. So in years with a lower density of adult squirrels, juvenile survival was actually lower?
Hold on. Fewer adults equals worse survival for the young ones.
That's what the data is showing.
Why would that be? Do the adult squirrels, like, help the young ones out somehow?
It's an interesting question, right? This particular study doesn't give us a definite answer, but it makes you wonder if there's something going on there.
Yeah, like maybe the older squirrels know the best spots to find food,
Maybe.
or they help defend the youngsters from predators.
It's possible.
It's like they're passing on their wisdom.
Yeah, like a mentorship program for squirrels.
Exactly. Or maybe having more adults around just makes the whole squirrel community more stable,
It could be.
and that benefits everyone.
Right. So there's definitely more research to be done there.
Yeah, it's a bit of mystery.
But it seems like having a decent number of adult squirrels around is a good thing for the youngsters.
It takes a village, even in the squirrel world.
I guess so. But let's move on to those individual squirrel characteristics we talked about earlier.
Right, their birth date and growth rate. Does it really pay to be an early bird in the squirrel world?
Well, previous research on these squirrels already showed that both of those things, birth date and growth rate, they matter a lot. Early born squirrels and those that grow faster, they tend to have a better chance of survival.
Makes sense, they get a head start.
Exactly. But here's what's really interesting.
Okay.
In this study, once they accounted for whether or not a squirrel had a territory by autumn, birth date wasn't that important anymore.
Oh, interesting.
So it seems like being born early helps you get that territory.
Right.
But once you've got it, it doesn't really matter anymore when you were born.
Okay, so it's like getting a good spot in line.
Mm-hmm.
But the real prize is what's at the end of the line, not when you got there.
That's a great way to put it.
But what about growth rate?
So growth rate did still matter, even when they accounted for whether or not a squirrel had a territory.
So those fast growers had a better chance, no matter what.
Exactly. And when they looked at the body mass of the squirrels in autumn, they found that the squirrels that grew faster were indeed bigger.
Okay.
But birth date also played a role in that.
So the early birds and the fast growers were the biggest.
Exactly. They had that advantage going into winter. But wait, you might be thinking,
Yeah.
you just said that birth date didn't really matter once they had a territory, so why does growth rate still matter?
Yeah. If you're already bigger because you were born earlier, shouldn't that be enough?
Right. It's a good question. And this is what makes this research so interesting.
Yeah.
They think that growth rate might be a sign of other things that they couldn't directly measure.
Oh, like what kind of things are we talking about?
Well, maybe things like personality
Oh.
or how good a squirrel is at finding food.
Oh, right. Like those super sniffers.
Yeah, maybe some squirrels are just better at sniffing out those cones or
Yeah.
remembering where they hid them.
So some squirrels are just more resourceful.
Exactly. And, some squirrels might be bolder, more adventurous, which could give them an edge.
Right. Like they're willing to explore new areas, take a few more risks.
Right. So there's more to it than just being physically bigger. They think growth rate might be linked to these other advantages that they couldn't directly observe.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Predators, harsh winters, food availability, the number of other squirrels around, when they're born, how fast they grow, anything else? Or is that pretty much the whole squirrel survival story?
Well, there's one more piece to this puzzle.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
It has to do with the abundance of other animals in the forest.
Wait, other animals? But haven't we already talked about the predators? What other creatures could possibly be affecting these squirrels?
So we're not talking about predators this time. We're talking about other species that are part of the same ecosystem.
All right.
Specifically, they looked at snowshoe hares and voles.
Hares and voles. What do they have to do with squirrels? It's not like they're competing for the same food or anything.
You're right, they don't directly compete with the squirrels, but remember we were talking about lynx and weasels earlier?
Yeah, the predators.
Right, and how they can have a big impact on squirrel survival. Well, it turns out that those predators have their own favorite prey.
Okay.
So lynx are specialists in hunting snowshoe hares.
Oh, so they really love those hares.
They do, and weasels primarily go after voles.
So they each have their favorite food.
Exactly. And so the researchers wanted to see if the number of these prey animals, the hares and the voles, would affect how the predators impacted the squirrels.
I see. So if there are tons of hares around, maybe the lynx are so busy feasting on hare that they don't bother with the squirrels as much.
That was the idea. Like maybe it's a distraction,
Right.
but the study didn't actually find a strong connection there.
Really? So even with a lot of hares hopping around, the lynx were still a threat to the squirrels.
Yeah, it seems so. It's possible that even though lynx really prefer hares, they'll still go for a squirrel if it's an easy meal.
Right. Especially those vulnerable youngsters without a territory.
Exactly. But here's where the hare and vole story gets even more interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
They found that a high abundance of snowshoe hares was actually linked to increased juvenile squirrel survival.
Wait a minute, I'm confused. First, you're saying that lots of hares doesn't really distract the lynx,
Yeah.
and now you're saying more hares is actually good news for the squirrels?
I know, it's a little counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But remember, red squirrels have been known to prey on hare leverets.
What are leverets?
Those are baby hares.
Oh, baby hare.
Yeah, so with more hares around, there are more leverets, and maybe the squirrels are taking advantage of this extra food source.
Ah, okay, so it's like a bonus protein boost
Exactly.
on top of their usual cones.
Right. Although they don't think it would have a huge impact on their survival over the whole winter.
Okay, so maybe it helps a little, but it's not the main reason for those higher survival rates.
Right. Now, what about the voles? What did they find about their impact?
Yeah, what about those little guys?
Well, this is where it gets a little weird.
Okay.
Years with high vole abundance were actually linked to lower juvenile squirrel survival.
More voles equals bad news for squirrels. But why? I mean, they don't eat the same things, do they?
No, their diets are quite different. Red squirrels rely mostly on those spruce cones, while voles eat a wider variety of things.
So if it's not about competition for food, what could it be? Are the voles attracting more predators or something?
That's one possibility.
Yeah.
That maybe when there are a lot of voles around, it's attracting other predators to the area that also prey on squirrels. Or maybe there's some other environmental factor that's at play here that they didn't measure in the study.
So we're still missing a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, it's a mystery. They think it's possible that the vole abundance is somehow connected to something else that affects squirrel survival, something that wasn't directly measured.
No.
It could be related to the overall health of the forest, or changes in weather patterns, or even disease. Who knows?
It's amazing to think that something as seemingly simple as a squirrel population could be influenced by so many different things.
Right.
Even animals that don't directly interact with them.
Absolutely. And it really highlights how connected everything is in nature.
It's a good reminder that we often don't see the full picture.
We don't. And it shows how much more we have to learn about these complex ecological relationships.
Yeah, I'm definitely starting to see those squirrels in my backyard in a whole new light after all of this.
Me too. And you know what? There's one more really fascinating aspect of this study that we haven't even touched on yet.
Oh, there's more. Don't leave me hanging. What else did they find?
Okay, so remember how we've been talking about how, like, individual squirrels can be different, like with their growth rate, and some are better at finding food.
Right, like those squirrel brainiacs who can remember where every single cone is stashed.
Exactly. Well, it turns out those differences, they matter for the territories themselves, too.
What do you mean? Not all territories are created equal.
Exactly. Some territories are bigger, some are smaller. And it turns out the size of a territory can actually be influenced by the personality of the squirrel who has it.
Wait a minute. Are you telling me squirrels have personalities?
Oh.
Like some are outgoing and some are shy.
They do. Just like us.
Wow.
Some squirrels are more bold, more aggressive, and some are more timid and cautious.
So are you saying that those bolder, more adventurous squirrels end up with the bigger, better territories?
You got it. They tend to have larger territories.
Okay.
And here's the really cool part.
Yeah.
They actually pass down those larger territories to their offspring.
So it's like inheriting the family estate.
It is like a squirrel dynasty.
Wow. So not only does being a bold squirrel help you get ahead in life,
Yeah,
it helps your kids too.
exactly. And that can have a big impact on whether those offspring survive their first winter.
That makes sense. More space, more resources, more places to hide from predators.
Exactly.
It's like a trust fund,
Yeah.
but in the form of prime squirrel real estate.
I love that analogy. But it's not just about the territory itself.
Oh, what else is there?
The personality of the parent can also influence how well their offspring do, even if they don't inherit that particular territory.
Okay, now that's interesting. How does that work? Can a bold squirrel, like, teach their kids to be brave?
It's not about directly teaching them, it's about their behavior,
Right.
having a direct impact.
Okay.
So, for example, bolder mothers are much better at defending their young from predators.
Oh, okay.
Like they're more likely to put up a fight to chase away those threats and protect their babies.
They're like the mama bear squirrels of the forest.
Exactly. So even if a squirrel doesn't inherit a big territory, they still benefit from having a mom who's fearless and protective.
So personality, territory size, inheritance, parental behavior, it's all connected.
It is. It paints a really complex picture of squirrel life.
Yeah, much more than I ever imagined.
And it shows how these individual differences can have these lasting effects even across generations.
It's not just about survival of the fittest in a purely physical sense.
Right.
It's about all these other factors, too.
Exactly. There's so much more going on than we might realize.
Well, my mind is officially blown. I'm never going to look at a squirrel the same way again.
Me neither. And this research has implications for us humans too, even though we're not squirrels.
What do you mean?
Well, I think one of the big takeaways here is that we often underestimate animals, especially those that we think of as common or ordinary.
Yeah, it's easy to dismiss squirrels as just those cute little guys who bury nuts.
Right. But there's so much more than that.
They're way more complex.
They have personalities, they have strategies, they make decisions that impact their lives and the lives of their kids.
And that 27-year data set, that's just incredible.
It is.
It really shows how much we can learn from long-term studies.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance of studying not just individual species, but also how they interact with each other and with their environment.
Right, it's all connected.
Exactly.
So I guess the question is, what can we learn from these squirrels? I mean, besides the fact that they're a lot more interesting than we might think.
Well, for me, it's a reminder that we need to pay attention to those individual differences, the things that make each animal unique. And we need to think about the long-term consequences of our actions.
Because what we do today can impact future generations.
Exactly. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind, especially when we're talking about conservation.
Yeah, if we want to protect a species, we can't just focus on their basic needs like food and shelter.
Right.
We need to understand the bigger picture.
We do. And how everything is interconnected.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm ready to go out and hug the nearest squirrel right now.
Me too. But maybe let's admire them from a distance.
Yeah, probably a good idea. But seriously, this has been such a fascinating deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing all this amazing squirrel science with us.
Of course. It's been my pleasure. And for listeners out there, here's something to think about.
Okay, hit me with it.
We've seen how crucial timing is for these red squirrels. Getting a territory early can make all the difference.
Right.
But what about for us humans? How does the timing of our decisions and life events shape our own journeys?
That's a great question. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time for another adventure into the fascinating world of science